Hi, everyone. Welcome to Teaching Outside the Canon, Latin Speakers Outside Rome. My name is Maureen Lamb, and I'm always looking for new ways to incorporate Latin resources in my classroom. I want to draw your attention first to this picture. This is a picture of Numidian cavalry on the column of Trajan. The interesting thing about this is a lot of the cavalrymen, a lot of the people who had slingshots, even a lot of archers were actually Roman auxiliary troops. And that meant that they were from the provinces of Rome and they were not Roman citizens. But if they fought in the army for 25 years, then they were awarded Roman citizenship. So we have a lot of people from around the Roman Empire who spoke Latin and who engaged with Latin as a language. And we have Latin speakers in North Africa. We have Latin speakers in Turkey. We have Latin speakers in Gaul. We have Latin speakers in Spain. We have Latin speakers in Britain. And so there's a lot of Latin. It's not just all coming from the city of Rome. So that's important to note. So we're going to go through some of my favorite resources for finding Latin to read with students from outside of Rome. So here are the top 5 Latin text types from the Roman provinces and the areas outside Rome. You may recognize this picture. This is a picture of election graffiti from Pompeii. This is something that I use all the time. I've talked about it a lot before. I'm sure a lot of you know this. And there are a lot of great free resources for this. So I'm going to pass over this one and go to the next one. So let's talk a little bit about public inscriptions. This is one of my favorites. This is the inscription from the Temple of Isis. And this is the Temple of Isis that is in Pompeii. This shows the kind of multicultural, multi-religion nature of a lot of these places outside of Rome. So the Temple of Isis indicates that there were people from Egypt or people who had traded with Egypt in this area. So that's something important to note. And additionally, this is dedicated by a 6-year-old boy. So we have Calcinus here, and this temple was built by him, but also by his father, who is a freedman, meaning he had been enslaved and he was now freed. And so he used his wealth here to repair the Temple of Isis, which had been destroyed earlier in an earthquake. And so this is an earthquake that predated the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, so it didn't stand long. It was destroyed again in the eruption. And this Calcinus is 6 years old. He's on the Pompeian Council, and his father, a freedman, helped him finance this. This is really interesting. And this tells you a lot about Pompeii. First of all, we have this multicultural nature here. We have multiple religions here. We have someone who was enslaved who is now free. And we have him elevating his son by putting him on the city council and by having him dedicate this public building of public worship of the goddess Isis. So that's all really important. Another cool fact about this, though, is that, here's a kind of a cleaner version of this. But the cool fact here, this is a quote from Pompeii the Living City by Alex Butterworth and Ray Lawrence, is no record of those who succeeded in fleeing during August AD 79 has been found, except for one, the tomb of an army veteran who died and was buried in Spain some years later. To the shades of Numerius Popidius Calcinus, Decurion, well-deserving. Quintus Caecilius, his son, set this up. Was he, as seems probable, the same Calcinus who had been granted his place on the city council of Pompeii at the age of 6 years old as a reward for his father's rebuilding of the Isis temple? Hardly could a more representative figure from the city's last years live to tell its tragic tale. So that's really cool. He could have survived. That's awesome. And so that's a really cool one to read with your students, because then they can see, oh, wow, this is an inscription, and then this is what happened to him later in life. This is the theater of leftist Magna, and it's really interesting because you can see the sign here for the theater that's a dedication is bilingual. Here we have the language spoken in leftist Magna, but we also, on top of that, have Latin. It reminds me of when you're driving in Quebec and you see all the signs in English and in French. And so it's really interesting that the Latin language was spoken and was so prevalent in other parts of the empire. Not just in Rome, Latin was spoken all over the empire. So much so that signs like this may have been bilingual. Another interesting place to find resources like this are curse tablets. This is one of my favorite. In fact, this story may have inspired Tolkien in the Story of the Rings. A ring was found in the 1700s in a field, and this was a gold 10-sided ring. Here you can see it says Sunve on it, and that Sunve is backwards Venus, just like Roma is Amor, which I think is kind of fun. And so it also says that on it, vivas in Deo. So vivas in Deo is live in God. So presumably this is something about monotheism. So perhaps this is a reference to whoever had the ring as being Christian. And we actually have the name of this guy, Synicianus, which he wrote on the ring as well. Now, the fun part begins when this cursed tablet was unearthed at a temple to the British deity Nodens. And here, this cursed tablet says it's Silvianus curses whoever stole his ring. And he says that he suspects none other than Synicianus of stealing his ring. And so this is a cool story of two artifacts that commune with each other from the provinces in Latin. You can see the communication between these two artifacts and the fact that it may have inspired Tolkien, which is really cool. Gravestones are another really cool way to learn about the lives of people in Rome who may not have been famous. And so it's really fun to learn about their lives here. On the left, you see a tombstone to Regina. And Regina was married to Barates. She had been enslaved and she was freed and she was married by Barates. And he was from Palmyra. And he wrote in his language at the bottom, "She was my wife, alas." And so this is a really touching monument because here he married her and then he wrote in Aramaic about her as well as in Latin, which was the language that was the language they were using. Then we also have this really cool one. This is a guy on a horse trampling an enemy underfoot. And this is someone named Genialis. And Genialis is all the way from Bulgaria, apparently. And this was a tomb that was in Britain. He was just 5 years short of gaining Roman citizenship. But this is a tomb that really highlights his bravery. They have him as a cavalryman and they have him trampling the enemy underfoot, which is really interesting. And so it's showing that even though he technically was not a Roman citizen yet, he was clearly well respected by the people he served with in his auxiliary unit, which was for cavalry. More graffiti, which is really interesting. Again, we're not doing election graffiti, is graffiti found on the bits and pieces of pottery that we have left over. So here we see a traditional plate, and the plate has a Latin inscription in it. But this plate was found in its Terra Sigillata in Gaul. So here we have Terra Sigillata, and it's inscribed. We also have this fun lead slingshot that was found in Spain, and it says Pompeii Magnus on it. It says Gnaeus Magnus. So maybe it's I'm throwing this at you, Pompey. And there were some less polite things that people wrote on slingshots, but soldiers often inscribed the slingshots. They either drew pictures on them or they wrote words on them. We actually did a project this year where students thought about what you would write on, if you had a kindness thing that you were going to throw at someone, what you write on it in Latin. It was really fun. And also we have a pottery shirt that looks like it may have someone's name on it. So inscribing it saying, "This is my bowl, don't touch it." Like you might write on a cup with a Sharpie, "This is my cup, don't touch it," which I think is pretty cool. But again, showing that the use of Latin was very widespread throughout the empire here. And that pottery shard was from Spain. So you have Spain, and Gaul there. There's also a really cool anecdote about the provinces. There are many anecdotes about the provinces and the people who lived here. This is when the emperor Septimius Severus went to go visit Hadrian's Wall. He was approached by someone who was serving on Hadrian's Wall as an auxiliary unit. And this was someone from Ethiopia. He's called them Ethiopians. And so he approaches him with cypress. And that's not good. You're not supposed to approach someone with cypress because cypress was something that was used in funerary rites. And so that's a big no-no. You don't do that to your emperor. And so the emperor is very upset by this. And the Ethiopian person who is joking and he's saying, "Oh, there's nothing left for you, Septimius, except to become a god, to go to the next life and become a god." But he's very shaken by this, which is really interesting. And it's interesting too that here we're talking about Septimius Severus visiting Britain and meeting a soldier from Ethiopia. Again, thinking about the multicultural nature of the Roman army at this point. Here are some resources that you might find helpful. We've got ancientgraffiti.org. We have a military history blog that has a lot of how sling bullets were used, and it has some of the polite or less polite words that might have been written in Latin on there. We also have Roman Inscriptions of Britain, which is an amazing resource. And please feel free to reach out. Follow me on Twitter at Latin Tech Tools and Instagram Latin Tech Tools. Go to my site, use my resources widely and availably, freely, go for it. Or if you have any questions, please email me at latintechtools@gmail.com. Thanks so much for watching.